Joining us is GP Dr Philipa Kaye. Philipa, this in some ways sounds like a statement of the bleeding obvious, as in loneliness, boredom make you eat bad food, but quite interesting to see an academic paper on it.
I think that this is a reflection of how we're actually approaching food, appetite, satiety, which is how full you feel, and how we're approaching it from a scientific point of view to give us a better understanding of chronic diseases like obesity in order then to come up with new treatments. Now, we have to be cautious about this study. It involved 93 women, which is a very small number in sort of study terms. And it did show that the area of the brain lit up greater in women who identified as being lonely. Now, these were young women, they were in their 20s, and we know that loneliness actually is more common in young adults and also older adults. It didn't look at men, it didn't look at other things. So there are lots of ifs and buts around this study. But what it highlights is actually the medical dangers of being lonely and social isolation, which are very real.
And that's very interesting because I think politicians over the last sort of 10 years or so have been catching up on the idea that actually loneliness can really hold a country back. It can hold back your economy if you have significant proportions of the population who are lonely. It can obviously have detrimental health impacts, and that actually it's something that politicians, I don't know if I'm sure you do remember, there was a sort of happiness index that was introduced with great fanfare by the British government a few years ago, and other countries have done research into that, showing that this is something that we should be thinking about.
And actually, loneliness affects both physical health and psychological health and mental health. Loneliness increases essentially levels of stress hormones that are going around in the body. It is associated with having a higher risk of high blood pressure, which itself is a risk factor for other conditions. It's associated with around a 30% increase in the risk of heart attack or stroke, about a 50% increase in the risk of depression. It also increases your risk of obesity, of dementia, and even of early death. So this really, really has a significant impact. And from a political point of view, even from a solely sort of NHS economic point of view, it costs money.
Yeah.
And we need to think about what it is about society that has changed, that people are more lonely or reporting to be more lonely than they used to be. As I said, it's commoner in certain groups, young adults and older adults, but it's also commoner in people from lower socioeconomic groups. If you're an immigrant, it's commoner in the LGBTQIA plus community, and we need to look at why. But also for anybody who is sitting at home today with the television on for company, we need to say, well, what is it that we can do to help with that loneliness and social isolation? Bearing in mind, actually, that you can be lonely and be surrounded by people if you don't have a connection, if you don't have a meaningful relationship with people. So even if you are somebody who is surrounded by people, you still might feel lonely. And actually, they think about 3.8 million people in the UK would identify as being chronically lonely. So that's always or most of the time. And there are some things that we can and should do, and some of it does seem easier than others, and so we say encourage people. We don't pick up the phone. Actually, people are generally glad to hear from you, even if it's only a WhatsApp message. We want you to join local groups. I walked on the school run today. I walked past my local library and it had a conversation group, a coffee group, come out of the cold group, go in, even if you're just reading the newspaper, someone comes and sit next to you. Volunteering is a real opportunity to make a connection with other people, but we also know that doing something good for other people improves your own mental health with the knock-on effects that has. And then if you are feeling lonely, doing things too that you enjoy to sort of distract yourself away from that loneliness. But my take-home message, the other take-home message that I have is this, is that when we walk down the street, smiling at people, people used to take off their hat and say good morning to each other. And that's not the society that we live in. And actually, if you smile at the person next to you at the bus stop, sometimes they look at you like, why are you trying to talk to me? But actually, for some people, that's their only connection. That's their only social connection. And as a GP, I'm really aware of that when people come and talk to me, I might be the only person that they've spoken to in a week. And how important and how small that kindness can be if we do it to each other, yet what a significant difference it can make.
And Philippa, I think this brings on so many other questions as well. It's one of the reasons that so many people bemoan the advent of the automated checkout at the supermarket, because not only are they incredibly frustrating when, unidentified object in the bagging area and all that, but they've taken away, just like you were saying, sometimes that's somebody's sole human interaction of that day, particularly the elderly. One of the best solutions to this problem that I remember doing a piece on for the news about 15 years ago was when I went to Scandinavia, and they had introduced a housing solution, which was to put university and young graduates and young people, and now, of course, 15 years on, the housing crisis is so bad, they'd be so grateful, in to live with elderly people in old people's homes. But instead of making the old people's homes just full of old people, they were mixing them with old people who were paying to be looked after, paying to be in this sheltered accommodation. And then the young people would move in and would get free accommodation. But in return for their free accommodation, they spent some time in the common areas with the old folk, and they made these wonderful friendships. And the older generation were telling the younger generation about, their lives, playing chess with them, playing jigsaws with them. And everybody got something out of it, and they all loved it. And I just wish that something like that could be introduced here.
If you, again, go back to that local library, you will often find things like the baby groups in old age homes, and the joy that brings actually everybody concerned is something which is rather wonderful. We are pack animals. At a basic evolutionary level, we are pack animals, and the data actually supports that. Men are more likely to live longer if they are married or cohabiting. We need each other, and as society sort of has closed its doors, and the pandemic made that a little bit worse, it sort of really sped that up. And as people are working from home and young people aren't developing relationships in the office on the daily commute, we are seeing more and more problems like this. And so I think that whilst it's a very small study that has, a lot more work to be done around it, what it does is helps us talk about the bigger picture here, which is about loneliness. And there is a campaign called the Campaign to End Loneliness, and there's lots of information on the NHS Every Mind Matters website. But we really do need to encourage not only us to look after each other, but people who are struggling come and take advantage of all the social prescribing things that are out there to help.
Brilliant advice, Dr. Philipa Kaye. Thank you so much. And if you're reaching for the cake, as that report shows, it might just be that actually what you should be doing is reaching for the phone. Pick up the phone